There is a particular kind of silence that follows a man when the crowd stops cheering. When the stadium lights go dark and the cameras turn away and the world moves on to the next story, the next champion, the next headline. Tom Brady knows that silence now. At 48 years old, sitting in a broadcast booth rather than under center, calling other men's games instead of winning his own, Brady has had more time than ever before to sit inside that silence and confront what it is telling him. And what it is telling him is not comfortable. For 2 decades, Tom Brady was the most protected man in American sports. Protected by his talent, protected by his wealth, protected by the carefully constructed image of a man who had everything figured out. 7 Super Bowl rings, a supermodel wife, children who adored him, a body that defied aging, a brand worth hundreds of millions of dollars. From the outside, the life of Tom Brady looked like something a Hollywood screenwriter would reject for being too perfect, too clean, too impossibly good to be believable. But the outside of a life and the inside of a life are 2 entirely different things. And in recent months, as Brady has opened up in newsletters, podcasts, interviews, and even in the quiet language of his social media posts, the inside of his life has finally started showing itself to the world. What people are seeing is not the champion. What they are seeing is a man reckoning with choices he made across 23 years of professional football. Choices that won him everything the sport had to offer. Choices that cost him the one thing no trophy can replace. His marriage to Gisele Bündchen officially ended in October 2022. The divorce was finalized quickly, almost clinically. The paperwork processed in a single day thanks to a prenuptial agreement and custody arrangements they had already worked out privately. Both released statements that were gracious and measured, talking about their love for their children, their mutual respect, their commitment to co-parenting. It was handled the way 2 wealthy, famous, image-conscious people handled the collapse of a 13-year marriage. Publicly dignified, privately devastating. But the real story did not begin in October 2022. It began years earlier, in a moment that Brady himself would later confess to on national radio, a moment that revealed just how long this marriage had been silently fracturing beneath the surface of its picture-perfect exterior. Back in 2020, Brady sat down with Howard Stern for one of the most candid interviews of his career. Stern has a gift for extracting honesty from people who have spent their public lives avoiding it, and Brady was no exception. In that conversation, Brady revealed something that stunned listeners. He told Stern that Gisele had written him a letter. Not a love letter. Not a note of encouragement before a big game. A letter of warning. A letter that laid out in clear and painful terms exactly what was wrong with their marriage and exactly what would happen if nothing changed. According to Brady, Gisele wrote that their relationship was only working for one person. That person was him. She described feeling like a single mother, raising their children largely on her own, while Brady poured every ounce of his focus, energy, and presence into football. During the season, he was physically and mentally unavailable. 6 months of every year consumed by practice schedules, film study, travel, and the relentless psychological demands of being an NFL quarterback at the highest level. When the season ended, the absence did not. There was always something else. Another business venture. Another training camp. Another opportunity that required his complete attention. The family waited. Gisele waited. And she was tired of waiting. She told him in that letter that she had her own dreams, her own ambitions, her own sense of self that had been slowly compressed to make room for his. She had walked away from the peak of a modeling career that made her one of the most recognizable faces on the planet. She had relocated her life across the country multiple times to follow his career from team to team. She had built her entire daily existence around the needs of a man who was famous for needing everything to revolve around him. And she had done it willingly, lovingly for years. But willingness has limits. Love without reciprocity eventually exhausts itself. Brady told Howard Stern that he still kept that letter, that he still read it sometimes, that it served as a reminder of something important. What is striking about that admission, in hindsight, is the word he used. Reminder. Not a catalyst for change. Not a turning point. A reminder. Something he returned to occasionally, the way you return to a warning label you have already read and chosen to set aside. Because here is what happened after that letter. Nothing changed. Football remained the center of everything. Brady continued to train with the same monastic dedication that had defined him since his earliest days in New England. He continued to travel, to commit, to sacrifice everything peripheral to the pursuit of excellence on the field. And Gisele continued to hold the household together, to raise the children, to be the constant presence in a family that had an absent father at its center, not absent emotionally, not cold or uncaring, but absent in the most literal sense. Not there. Somewhere else. Always somewhere else. Then came February 1st, 2022. After 22 seasons and 7 championships, Tom Brady stood before the world and announced his retirement from professional football. He was 44 years old. He talked about gratitude and perspective. He talked about the other chapters waiting to be written. And somewhere in Tampa, Gisele Bündchen allowed herself to believe that the chapter she had been waiting 13 years for was finally beginning. That belief lasted 40 days. On March 13, 2022, Brady reversed course. He announced he was returning to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for another season. His statement was confident and direct, the language of a man who had made up his mind and was not particularly interested in discussing the process. He said he had realized his place was still on the field, that the competitive fire had not gone out, that there was more football left in him, and he intended to play it. What the statement did not address was what had been discussed in private. What agreements had been made during those 40 days of supposed retirement. What Gisele had been led to believe. What promises, spoken or unspoken, had been extended and then taken back in a single press release. People close to the situation described Gisele as blindsided. Not by the decision itself, perhaps, but by how it was made. Unilaterally. Without genuine partnership. The man who had read her letter, who had told Howard Stern it served as a reminder, had made the single most significant decision about their shared future without her as an equal voice in the conversation. He had decided, and then he had announced it. The 2022 season began with Brady physically present but emotionally fractured in ways that were visible to everyone around him. In August, he took an extended leave from training camp, citing personal reasons, a phrase that explained nothing while implying everything. By September, reports were coming in from multiple directions. The couple was living separately. Attorneys had been consulted. The marriage that had survived Super Bowl losses and retirement announcements and cross-country moves was finally, irreversibly, coming apart. What followed across those months was one of the more painful spectacles in recent sports history. A great quarterback playing out a season while his marriage dissolved in public. Brady's physical condition deteriorated in ways veterans of the game found alarming. He lost nearly 20 pounds. The face that had graced magazine covers and endorsement campaigns looked hollow. Former assistant coach Tom Moore, who spent years inside NFL locker rooms observing the private lives of public men, later described what he witnessed during this period. He wrote about Brady sitting alone in full uniform after games, head down, motionless for 20 minutes or more, unreachable by coaches or teammates, a man sealed inside something private and painful while the world around him went through the ordinary rhythms of a post-game locker room. On October 28, 2022, the divorce became official. 13 years of marriage ended. The paperwork was filed and finalized on the same day, efficiently and quietly, the way things end when both parties have already grieved privately and are simply completing a legal formality. Both statements were kind. Both emphasized the children. Neither said the thing that everyone already knew. What everyone knew was this: Gisele Bündchen had waited a very long time. She had communicated her needs clearly. She had given him warning in writing and in conversation, and in the painful patience of years. She had watched him unretire after 40 days and understood in that moment that the answer to the question she had been asking across their entire marriage was never going to change. Football was first. It had always been first. And she was done arranging her life around that reality. In March 2023, Gisele broke her public silence in an interview with Vanity Fair magazine. She came prepared to address the narratives that had been circulating, chief among them the story that she had issued Brady an ultimatum: football or the marriage, choose one. She was emphatic in rejecting that version of events. She called it hurtful and untrue. She had never demanded he quit football. That was not who she was, and not what had happened. What had happened, she explained, was something quieter and more permanent than a single confrontation. They had grown into different people who wanted different things from life. When they met, she was 26 and he was 29, and the things they wanted from the future were aligned. As the years passed, as the seasons accumulated, as the children grew up inside a household built around one man's athletic career, that alignment had shifted. What she needed from a partnership and what he was capable of giving had moved apart so gradually that by the time the distance was undeniable, there was no obvious moment to point to, no single event to blame. She also addressed with visible emotion the rumors that she had been unfaithful. Her response was pointed. She called the accusation a lie and connected it to something she had observed more broadly, the tendency to punish women who find the courage to leave. To explain their departure through invented wrongdoing rather than accept that a woman decided her needs were not being met and acted accordingly. Whatever one thinks of the circumstances of her divorce, that observation carries weight. The story of a woman leaving a famous and beloved man is easier to digest if she did something wrong. It is harder to accept if she simply decided she deserved better. In a separate interview with Robin Roberts, Gisele described the end of her marriage as the death of a dream. She paused while saying it. She had to collect herself before continuing. This was not someone who had departed without grief, who had detached cleanly and walked away without looking back. This was someone mourning the future she had imagined when she was 26 years old and in love with a quarterback who was going to be great and with whom she was going to build something that lasted. She built herself instead. And she did it with evident care and intention. By the time the divorce had settled into the past and the world had moved on to other stories, Gisele had established a new life in Florida centered on her children, her wellness interests, her businesses, and eventually a new relationship with Joaquin Valente, a jiu-jitsu instructor she had been photographed with in the months following the divorce. The relationship developed quietly, away from the machinery of celebrity gossip, and was confirmed over time not through formal announcements, but through the simple accumulation of a life being shared. She later welcomed a child with Valente, and in late 2025, the couple married in a private ceremony at their Florida home. The wedding was small, family and close friends only. Nothing about it was designed for public consumption. It was, by all accounts, exactly the kind of occasion Gisele had spent years wanting and not having. When that news became public, Brady's response was scrutinized by everyone paying attention to this story. He did not make statement. He did not appear in interviews addressing it directly. What he did was post an Instagram story featuring a song whose chorus spoke to feeling like one's life does not belong to oneself. Whether this was a deliberate communication or an impulsive moment of digital transparency, it landed as a window into something real. A man at 48, watching the woman he had been married to for 13 years begin a new chapter with someone else, sitting with whatever that feels like. Then came what many observers considered the true breaking point. In May 2024, Brady agreed to be the subject of a Netflix roast special. The format is well established. Comedians take the stage and mock the guest mercilessly, and the guest laughs along to demonstrate they are a good sport and can take a joke. Brady sat in the chair and absorbed hours of material targeting his divorce, his choices, his failures as a husband and father, all delivered as entertainment for a global audience of millions. The morning after the roast aired, Brady called his children. Jack, his oldest, was 17. Benjamin was 15. Vivian was 12. They had seen the clips. They had heard strangers reduce the pain of their family's breakup to comedic material, and they did not understand why their father had allowed it. They asked him directly, "What was the point of that? Why did you do it?" Brady later described that conversation as feeling like a stake through the heart. For a man who had spent his career maintaining composure under pressure, who had built a public identity on the image of a person who is always in control, always prepared, always operating from a position of clarity and confidence, those words from his children undid something significant. He had no answer for them. There was no game plan for this particular moment. There was only the recognition that in his attempt to demonstrate good humor and self-awareness, he had instead handed his children's grief to strangers as raw material for entertainment. He apologized to Gisele privately for the jokes that were made at her expense. The damage, as he acknowledged, was already done. What the roast forced into the open was a question Brady had been circling for years without allowing himself to fully face. Was the trade worth it? He had given football everything. Not metaphorically. Literally everything. His time, his presence, his health, his marriage, his children's holidays, the ordinary moments that accumulate into a life. He had given the game 23 Christmas mornings. He had missed Thanksgivings and birthdays and the invisible everyday moments that children remember not as events but as feelings, the feeling of a parent being there, being present, being interested in something other than the next game. He had done this consciously and consistently for over 2 decades. And when he finally stopped and looked at what he had built outside of football, when he turned away from the trophies and the records and the championships and looked at his actual life, what he saw was a man who had excelled magnificently at one thing and failed quietly at another. Earlier this year, Brady published a newsletter to his subscribers that read less like the confident communications his fans had come to expect and more like a man talking himself through something he had not yet resolved. He wrote about fatherhood and what it means to provide for a family. He argued that his dedication to football, the early mornings and the film study, and the relentless preparation was itself a form of presence. That by being great at his work, by earning the wealth and the stability that came with being the best quarterback in NFL history,